I figured on this show, we could talk maybe a little bit more about the short term here with the midterm elections coming up in 3 weeks now? Is that?
Yeah, less than 3 weeks now. So, yeah,
it's moving fast.
It is. And I read your piece of the Reload pointing to this new poll. This was it a Siena poll?
New York Times
in Siena. Yeah. Showing just 1% of likely voters saying that guns were their top priority, which, we have seen. I think other polls have shown that support's not quite as high. Although it's interesting when you break it down by party. I think this is one of the problems for Democrats is that guns and gun control is still a big issue for Democratic voters, but it's not nearly as important an issue for Republicans and independents. And that's one of the reasons why I think you're starting to see this swing in the polling, the generic ballot switching back to a Republican lead in some cases or a bigger Republican lead in some cases, because I don't think the Democratic push for gun control is resonating with American voters right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way the New York Times put it in their write-up was back in June, because we had this historic summer for the issue of guns in America, right? With the Uvalde shooting, of course, being a huge event that's it's one of the worst massacres in American history, of course, and of course the police response to it was another hugely controversial part to what happened. And in response to that, you saw the first really new federal gun restrictions in several decades. They were on the more moderate side, I guess, of compared to what a lot of gun control advocates want, but they were still new restrictions. There was a bipartisan bill. The president signed it. And then, of course, we also got a historic ruling from the Supreme Court in Bruin, which of course, we talked about more of the implications on your show. And people should head over and listen to that episode, of course. But back in that time period, you saw polling, including this New York Times poll, that had guns. Now, it was never the number one issue,
right?
But it was up at 8-9% compared to 1%. And the New York Times notes that among the people who had it as their top issue, they preferred Democratic control of Congress. So with this issue receding in this poll, at least, that indicated it was a good issue for Democrats at the time in the summer. I think it is. It's certainly not good for the state of the Democratic Party's attempt to try and hold on to control.
No, I think you're right. And it's interesting how this has played out. I mean, as you note, earlier in the year, this was an issue that was polling much better. And you look at what's going on in Ohio, for example. Nan Whaley, who is the former mayor of Dayton. She was the mayor of Dayton at the time of the mass shooting in 2019, I believe it was. And she basically based her gubernatorial campaign around the idea that Mike DeWine promised he would do something about gun control, and he didn't. Instead, he sided with the gun lobby, and he, signed constitutional carry, and he signed the, armed school staff bill. And that message never really took off in Ohio. Like, DeWine has been leading handily in every poll. I think that one of them, he's up by like 23 points. He is. The Senate race is very tight, right? Between JD Vance and Tim Ryan. But the governor's race, I mean, DeWine is just, clobbering Whaley, who basically ran a campaign on gun control. And I think we're seeing that same dynamic play out in Texas. Beto O'Rourke obviously tried to use the shooting in Uvalde to make gun control a top issue in this campaign. But one of the last polls I saw that came out of Texas, and it's been a few weeks since we've had one, did ask, what are your top issues? And for Republicans and independents, it was border security. I mean, by far. For Democrats, it was abortion. The second top most important issue for Republicans and independents was inflation. For Democrats, it was guns. And so I think that they are finding themselves out of touch with Americans. Inflation job security, those kitchen table issues, I think, have emerged once again as the primary issue because things aren't getting any better. Every time we go to the grocery store, it's costing us more money. It's starting to cost us more money when we go fill up our tank. And while Joe Biden was happy to take credit for gas prices going down, all of a sudden it's, the oil companies' fault and Putin and whoever else when the prices start going up. I don't think Democrats are doing themselves any favors, but I also wonder too, Stephen, whether or not the few months we've had since the Bruin decision coming down, we know that there's been this influx of people who have sought concealed carry permits in these May issue states. But I don't know. I wonder if to one degree or another, there hasn't also been a shift in position once again back towards support for the Second Amendment and, folks being less inclined to support various gun control policies.